The kitchen, my kitchen, smelled of rosemary and butter, a rich, fragrant alchemy that had taken hours to perfect. The stew, a dark, velvety concoction of tender beef and potatoes that dissolved on the tongue, simmered gently on the stove, its aroma a ghost of countless family dinners past. It was the scent of home, or at least what home used to be. The dining table was already set, a silent testament to a ritual I refused to let die. The silverware, my wedding silver, was polished to a high gleam, and the linen napkins were folded into the shape of little swans, a whimsical touch my late husband Robert had always adored. It was a table set for a family, for connection, for a warmth that now existed only in my memory. They burst in with the usual cacophony of their arrival, a tidal wave of noise and restless energy that crashed against the quiet order I had created. Richard, my son, was laughing loudly at something on his phone. His wife, Tiffany, was orchestrating the movement of their luggage with the sharp, efficient commands of a drill sergeant, and my grandson, Leo, 17 and encased in a permanent shell of adolescent disdain, was already tracking beach sand across the gleaming hardwood floors I had paid to have refinished last spring. "We should get to the port early," Richard announced, his voice booming with a manufactured excitement. He slapped a glossy cruise itinerary onto the center of the table, right next to the napkin swans, as if it were a trophy he had won. "They upgraded us to the luxury deck, can you believe it? Comes with private butlers and a 24-hour caviar bar." My hands, spotted with age but still steady, trembled just slightly as I began to ladle the dark, fragrant stew into the heavy ceramic bowls I had warmed in the oven. I didn't want to intrude on their excitement. I never did. My role in this house had long been relegated to that of a silent background fixture, a provider of meals and a keeper of a home they no longer saw as mine. But something in the deliberate way they avoided my gaze, the careful, almost choreographed choreography of their movements to keep from acknowledging my presence, as I stood right there, my apron still tied neatly around my waist, the heavy ladle in my hand, made the silence feel like a physical object. It was sharp, cold, and it pressed against my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I cleared my throat, the sound small and hesitant in the cavernous, high-ceilinged room. Do you need me to pack anything for the trip?" I asked, my voice careful, measured, stripped of any expectation. It was Tiffany who answered first, her eyes still glued to the glowing screen of her phone, her thumbs flying across the keyboard. "Mom," she said, the word clipped and impatient, "the ship doesn't offer fall risk insurance. You know what that means, right? We just can't afford for someone to take a tumble on a moving deck." She said it as if discussing a logistical problem, like a piece of luggage that was too heavy to check. Then came the laughter. It wasn't the warm, genuine kind that bubbles up from the heart and makes your eyes crease at the corners. This was a dry, brittle sound, like shoes scraping across dirty, broken tile. My grandson, Leo, his spoon already halfway to his mouth, smirked, a cruel, knowing curl of his lips. "She's just a roach with a pension," he said, the words slithering out with the casual, thoughtless cruelty that only the young, convinced of their own immortality, can perfect. "She survives everything but adds nothing." That word, roach, it didn't hit me like a slap. A slap is honest, a clear act of aggression. This was worse. It was like a puff of smoke, something acrid and choking that I didn't even feel until it was already inside my lungs, poisoning the very air I breathed. The heavy ceramic bowl, suddenly weightless, slipped from my numb fingers. It shattered on the floor with a sharp, definitive crack, a sound that seemed to echo the breaking of something deep inside me. Dark, rich stew sprayed across the pale, immaculate linoleum. I stood frozen in the middle of the mess, my sensible orthopedic shoes soaked in beef broth, the comforting scent of rosemary now turning sickeningly sweet in my nostrils. For a long moment no one moved. They just stared, not at me, but at the mess on the floor, their faces masks of annoyance and inconvenience. "Great," Tiffany finally sighed, the sound a theatrical exhalation of exasperation. She pushed her chair back and stood up, her movements sharp and jerky. "Now I have to mop." We don't want the house smelling like old people's soup when the house sitter gets here. I bent down slowly, too slowly, my hip locking in a familiar, grinding protest halfway to the floor. My hand reached for a large piece of the broken bowl, and the sharp, jagged edge of the porcelain bit deep into the soft heel of my palm. A single perfect bead of red blood formed, swelled, then slid down my wrist in a thin accusatory line, disappearing into the sleeve of my cardigan. I stood up, saying nothing, my hand wrapped tightly in the corner of my apron. Richard didn't look up from his phone, his face illuminated by its cold blue light. They resumed their dinner as if nothing had happened, their conversation turning effortlessly to excursions in Cozumel and whether Tiffany should pack the silk dress or the linen one for the captain's dinner. My bowl was not replaced. No one offered me a plate. I had become invisible. I washed the dishes alone, my back to them, the clatter of plates and the rush of hot water a shield against the sound of their laughter filling the hallway. From the sink, I could hear Leo snort with derision. Can you imagine Grandma in a swimsuit? The crews would have to issue a tidal wave warning. I turned the faucet harder, the scalding water a welcome, tangible pain on my raw skin. I welcomed it. When I was finished, I dried my hands on a dish rag that smelled faintly and ironically of bleach. I climbed the stairs to my room, each step a slow, deliberate negotiation between my clicking knees and the crushing weight of their disregard. In the hallway, I paused outside the guest room. My room, technically, though they preferred to call it the overflow space, as if I were a piece of clutter they didn't know where else to store. I heard the distinct pop of a cork, followed by the clink of wine glasses. "A toast," Richard said, his voice muffled by the thin door, carrying an air of smug satisfaction. "To new beginnings. And to no more dead weight," Tiffany added, her voice sharp as glass. I closed my door behind me without a sound. The room was small and colder than the rest of the house. They kept the heat vent half shut, insisting it saved on energy costs. I sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed, the one with the permanently sunken middle and the faded, hand-stitched quilt I had made myself in 1972. The overhead light flickered, as it had been doing for months. My polite request to have the bulb replaced had been met with sighs and forgotten promises. I looked at my hand. The cut was deeper than I had thought, a clean, angry line that was still weeping blood. In the small, attached bathroom, there were no bandages in the medicine cabinet, only a half-used roll of toilet paper and an expired bottle of aspirin. Back in my room, I opened the drawer of the rickety nightstand. Beneath a stack of old, perfumed letters from Robert, there was a heavy, legal-sized envelope. Inside, nestled amongst bank statements and deed copies, was the one crucial detail, the one piece of my old life they had either forgotten or arrogantly dismissed. The house, this magnificent, sprawling house they treated as their own personal resort, was still, legally and irrevocably, in my name. They had never bothered to finalize the transfer of the deed, assuming, I suppose with the casual cruelty of heirs in waiting, that I would either die soon or simply forget my own name. They were profoundly wrong on both counts. Downstairs, they were packing now, the rasp of zippers cutting through the thumping bass of some pop song I didn't recognize. "Don't forget the good sunscreen," Tiffany called out. "And Grandma's pills," Leo joked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh wait, she's not coming." The laughter that followed was sharp and mocking, a sound that no longer hurt me. It clarified. I took a deep breath. There were no tears, no flashes of white-hot rage, just a cold, quiet clarity that settled deep in my bones. I opened my closet, pulled out the small, black, hard-shelled suitcase I hadn't touched since Robert's funeral, and began to pack. One simple dress, one warm cardigan, my good, comfortable shoes, and the contents of the heavy, legal-sized envelope. The rest I would not need. I sat on the edge of the bed, my small suitcase by the door, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and waited for the morning. Tomorrow I would start making calls, and by the time their magnificent luxury cruise ship left the port, they would be reminded that even roaches, when cornered, when starved, when pushed to the very edge of their own extinction, remember that they have claws. The irony was a bitter pill I had swallowed so many times it no longer had a taste. There was a time when my name, Professor Marie Wittmann, commanded respect. Students, their young faces alight with intellectual curiosity, would linger after my lectures on 19th-century American literature. They wanted to know if Emily Dickinson had truly intended to be so reclusive, or if Hemingway's sparse prose was a reflection of a deeper, unspoken sorrow. I was a respected academic, tenured before I turned 40, a woman who had built a life on the power and precision of words. I taught through 3 deans, 4 university presidents, and 30 graduating classes. But none of that intellectual capital, none of that hard-won respect, mattered once I stepped over the threshold of this house. In here, I was not Professor Wittmann. I was Mom, or worse, her, a vague, inconvenient pronoun. The erosion of my identity was a slow, deliberate process, a masterclass in psychological warfare waged with sighs and eye rolls. It began in earnest the year Leo, my grandson, applied to college. He had his heart set on the Ivy League, a dream fueled by his parents' relentless ambition. He sat me down one evening in the living room, his face a mask of desperate, entitled anxiety. "Ivy League or nothing, Grandma," he'd said. "Brown or Columbia. Anything else is a failure." He needed a letter of recommendation from a respected academic, and I was, to his pragmatic mind, the most convenient option available. I was, I admit, flattered at first, a foolish flicker of my old professorial pride. That was until I read the draft he had written for me to sign. It was a masterpiece of fiction, a curriculum vitae of a life he had never lived. He claimed to have published literary critiques in obscure journals, to have led a poetry workshop for homeless veterans, and to have volunteered at a center for at-risk inner-city youth. None of it, not a single word, was true. "Sweetheart," I told him gently, trying to navigate the treacherous waters of his fragile ego, "I can write you a wonderful letter, a truthful one, based on all the things you have actually accomplished." His face hardened instantly. "That's not good enough," he snapped, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and panic. "I'm competing with kids who are building satellites in their garage and saving orphans in Africa. No one cares if I was on the goddamn debate team." "Then be honest," I insisted, my own voice firmer now. "Let your words matter. Integrity is worth more than an acceptance letter from Brown." He called me a selfish, out-of-touch dinosaur. He stormed out of the room and told his parents that I, his own grandmother, had deliberately sabotaged his future. From that day forward, the shift in the household atmosphere was palpable. I was no longer Grandma the scholar. I was Grandma the saboteur. The looks from Tiffany, which had once been merely dismissive, were now openly hostile. She started to treat my past as a personal affront, a source of public embarrassment. One afternoon she walked in while I was reading on the porch and snapped a photo of me without asking. Later, I saw the image posted on her sprawling social media feed, accompanied by the caption, "My mother-in-law, the professor, thinks Shakespeare invented democracy. LOL. Hatch old people, hashtag living with parents." It got worse. She started screenshotting my own benign Facebook posts, a line of poetry from Edna St. Vincent Millay, a quote about kindness from Marcus Aurelius, an old photo of a book I loved, and sending them to her group chats. I know because I overheard her cackling in the kitchen one afternoon. "You guys, you have to see this. She's quoting dead people again. It's like living with a walking, talking Hallmark card." To them, everything I said, everything I valued was outdated, irrelevant, and deeply, profoundly embarrassing. Then came the gaslighting, a campaign of subtle psychological torment so insidious I began to doubt my own sanity. It started with small things. My reading glasses would vanish from the nightstand where I always left them. The leather-bound address book I kept by the phone, filled with the numbers of friends I had known for half a century, disappeared. Then, contacts on my phone were mysteriously, expertly altered. My dearest friend, Susan, a woman with whom I had exchanged Christmas cards for 40 years without fail, suddenly stopped answering my calls. I tried 3 times over the course of a week, and each time a confused, tinny voice answered, "Pete's Pizza, how can I help you?" At first, I thought I had simply misdialed. Then I looked closer. Her contact name was correct, but the number was different. A local pizza parlor's. When I asked Leo if he had touched my phone, he just shrugged, his eyes never leaving his video game. I don't know. Maybe you saved it wrong. Happens at your age, right? She's been calling a pizza shop all week demanding to speak to Susan. Tiffany chimed in to one of her friends on the phone later that day, her voice dripping with mock concern. We're probably going to have her checked out soon. It's getting sad. They both laughed. That night, during a dinner party with some of their friends, they played the voicemail I had accidentally left on that pizza line. It was me, my voice thin and confused, asking Susan if she still remembered the pink scarf I had crocheted for her in the winter of '81. The room howled with laughter. Is that really her? That's so tragically funny, one of their friends exclaimed. I swear my grandma did the same thing. She asked the mailman to turn off the TV. I smiled politely, excused myself, and went upstairs to my room, the overflow space. It is one thing to be forgotten. It is another thing entirely to be rewritten as a joke. The next morning, using an old paper Rolodex I had hidden in a shoebox, I found Susan's real number. Marie, she gasped when she answered. My God, where have you been? I was so worried. I thought you had passed away. Your number changed, your Facebook page was deleted. I never deleted anything, I whispered, the cold, horrifying reality sinking in. I sent flowers to your old address for your birthday, she continued, her voice filled with concern. They came back marked, no longer at this residence. That was when it all clicked into place. They had systematically, methodically, severed my connections to the outside world. They were rerouting my mail, altering my contacts, deleting my digital footprint. They were making me a ghost in my own life, brick by brick, lie by lie. I started checking everything. My credit score had been accessed 6 times in the past 2 months. Subscriptions to magazines I'd never heard of for everything from yachting to modern architecture were opened in my name. The Wi-Fi network which I paid for was no longer registered to me. Even our family Netflix account, a small shared pleasure, had my profile listed simply as Basic Grandma. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the attic. In a dusty, forgotten trunk under a pile of my husband's old sweaters was the manual for my state-of-the-art hearing aid, a gift from my university pension fund. I had always been too proud to use its more advanced features. I found the section I was looking for, a discreet, high-fidelity recording function. That night, I began to record. Tiffany, if she dies before the cruise, can we get a refund on her portion of the trip? Leo, she's like mold. You can't kill her. She just grows quieter and spreads to the corners. Richard, as long as she keeps signing the pension checks over to our joint account, I don't care what she hears or doesn't hear. Each sentence, each casual, cruel utterance was captured, a digital butterfly pinned to a board. I began to practice smiling in the mirror. Not a fake, forced smile, but a calm, patient, serene smile. The kind of smile that doesn't forgive. The kind of smile that waits. They thought I was fading into the background, a silent, senile old woman lost in her memories. They were wrong. I wasn't disappearing. I was documenting. The morning they left for their magnificent $40,000 cruise, they moved through the pre-dawn darkness in a series of hushed, conspiratorial whispers, thinking I was asleep. I heard them anyway. The soft thunder of suitcases rolling down the polished hardwood hallway, the hurried tap of expensive shoes on the tile of the foyer, Tiffany cursing under her breath when she spilled something, probably the overpriced organic vitamin packs she insisted everyone take for cruise ship immunity. I stayed in my bed in the overflow space, my eyes closed, my breath slow and steady, a study in feigned oblivion. Did you pack the underwater camera charger? Richard asked, his voice a low rumble. Yes. And your passport is in the front pocket of your carry-on. And Mom's pills? Leo asked, his voice laced with the familiar, sarcastic drawl that set my teeth on edge. There was a beat of silence, and then he snorted. Oh, wait. She's not coming. Laughter followed, sharp and mocking in the quiet house. Then the front door clicked shut. Silence descended, a heavy, blessed blanket. I waited a full 5 minutes, listening to the house settle around me, then rose and walked to the window. Their gleaming, oversized SUV pulled out of the driveway, its headlights bouncing off the tacky lawn ornaments Tiffany had insisted on buying. I watched until their taillights disappeared around the corner. Then, I went downstairs and boiled water for tea. The mug I chose was an old chipped ceramic one that had belonged to my mother. She had once said to me, "Marie, when they stop asking you what you want for breakfast, it's time to start preparing your escape." I sipped my tea in the silent, empty kitchen. At precisely 8:07 a.m., my phone, now a trusted ally, rang. It was Clara, my former student, now a formidable, no-nonsense probate attorney in the city. "It's done," she said, her voice crisp and efficient, devoid of any unnecessary sentiment. "The title has been transferred. The funds from the sale have been wired. The buyer's agent has the keys. The house is no longer yours, legally speaking." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "And the accounts?" I asked softly. "All bank accounts tied to your name, but which have shown access by other parties, have been frozen," she continued, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "The fraud department flagged them as potential identity theft and elder financial abuse. As a matter of fact, your grandson's credit card was just declined at a smoothie stand at the airport." A small sound, not quite a laugh, but a release of breath I had been holding for years, escaped my lips. "Thank you, Clara," I said. "Do you want me to tell you where they are right now?" she asked. "No," I replied, looking out the kitchen window at the quiet, sunlit street. "I already know." At the port of Miami, chaos was unfolding like a poorly directed, tragicomic play. They had arrived with their coordinated designer luggage sets, their printed, laminated itineraries, and an aura of entitlement so thick it was practically visible. Tiffany wore a sun hat the size of a steering wheel. Leo was recording everything on his phone, providing a running commentary for the cruise vlog he had promised his friends. The first hiccup came almost immediately. The check-in agent, a tired-looking woman with a patient smile, frowned at her computer screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said to Tiffany. "There seems to be a hold on your booking." "What kind of a hold?" Richard asked, stepping forward with an air of authority. "A financial one," the agent said flatly. "The primary payment method was declined, and it appears there's also a security alert on the primary traveler's ID." Tiffany leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "Excuse me? Do you know who we are?" "No," the agent replied, her patient smile never wavering. "But the system does. And it says here that this entire reservation is currently under investigation for potential fraud." The next 30 minutes were a blur of increasingly frantic phone calls, escalating tones, and rising tempers. Port security was summoned when Leo began shouting that he was going to sue the cruise line for emotional distress. "I paid for this! We paid for this!" he yelled, his face red and blotchy. "You paid with funds from a flagged account, sir," one of the security officers said calmly. Then came the final, crushing blow. A federal officer, his badge clipped neatly to his belt, approached the scene and asked Tiffany to step aside. He showed her something on a tablet. I imagine it was a list of the credit cards, the lines of credit, the department store accounts she had opened in my name over the past 2 years. Her face, even from my imagined vantage point, drained of all color. She pointed a trembling finger at her husband. "He told me to do it. It was his mother's account. She's old. She doesn't even know what's going on." The officer raised a single, unimpressed eyebrow. "So, you're admitting that you knowingly used her name and social security number to open multiple lines of credit without her explicit written consent?" "It wasn't like that," she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. "She gave us permission. She wanted us to have these things." "Did she?" the officer asked, his voice dangerously mild. "They tried calling me twice. I let it ring, imagining their growing panic. The third time I answered, my voice calm and serene. "You!" Tiffany screamed into the phone, her voice a raw, ragged shriek. "You did this! You ruined everything!" "I'm drinking Earl Grey tea," I said, my voice even. "It's a bit early in the morning for yelling, dear." "You think you've won?" You think you're so smart? No, dear, I replied, the words tasting like honey and freedom. I think I'm free. She screamed again, a wordless guttural sound of pure rage, so loudly that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Then came the words I had been waiting for, not out of satisfaction, but out of a need for final, absolute confirmation. That old roach, she's the one who did this. There was a pause, and then the officer's calm, authoritative voice cut through her tirade. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. I ended the call, set the phone down gently on the counter, and poured myself another cup of tea. Outside my window, the wind moved through the leaves of the old oak tree, and the birds chirped as if nothing had changed, but something had. Everything had. By that evening, I was sitting in a quiet, clean, and blissfully anonymous rental apartment a few miles away. It was small, but it was mine. There were no resentful footsteps pacing in the room above my head. No slamming drawers, no one telling me the Wi-Fi wasn't for old people, just a profound, healing peace. I lit a single candle and took out my notebook, the same one I had started all those months ago. I flipped to the last empty page and wrote one sentence. They left to conquer the ocean. I stayed to reclaim the shore. Then I closed the book, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night with the door unlocked.